This episode of the Student Housing Insight Podcast is sponsored by Simple Bills. Utility management is a beast in student housing. If you are not offering a frictionless and transparent utility billing process for your student residents, it's going to affect the brand of your student property through Google rankings and all the other review sites. Simple Bills is the answer. Check them out at simplebills.com. Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Dees, and joining me today is our co-host, Ken Miller. Ken, how are you?
I'm doing great, Wes. Thanks for asking.
Well, I'm glad that fall has finally come to the southeast.
So am I. My goodness. I mean, it was 97 degrees one day, and then literally the next day we dropped 20 degrees, and it's been that way ever since. So we're pretty happy to finally see fall here. I think we jumped, but it seems to me we jumped from a really hot summer to almost immediate winter. I don't know what happened to fall in between.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's nice to finally be wearing jeans to the office.
For sure.
Anyway, well, hey, Ken, I'm really excited for the listeners today. You did an interview back in September with Eddie Moreno, the Executive VP of Operations at Cardinal Group. And, you know, it's the thing I love about Eddie. Eddie's been on the podcast before. He was part of our site level to C-suite episode that we did a couple years ago at Interface. And, you know, he's just one of these guys. He's grown up in this industry very much like I have. But it's really cool to get his perspective on things and kind of how he's come up through the ranks. And then he's now at a company that's not just doing a large amount of student housing, but also doing a lot of conventional as well. But really, just before we get into it, I wanted to kind of ask you, hey, what were kind of your thoughts on this interview and bringing it to our audience, and what do you think they should be taking away from it?
Sure. I think that, well, first of all, I'd just kind of like to sort of dovetail on what you were talking about with Eddie. So it's always great to hear from somebody who has started in the industry in one position and worked their way through. And I think a number of us have done that with operational background, technology background, et cetera. We all started somewhere, and we've dedicated most of our lives, it seems, I know almost 50% of mine at this point, to the multifamily / student industry. And it's good to see that we have folks that have accomplished that. So I think it gives a lot of hope to those of us who are working in the trenches and doing things during our daily jobs, that there is opportunity within our industry to advance and move forward. And I certainly want to encourage anyone out there who is working in any capacity in student housing to know that the sky's the limit, really. It's just a matter of application, stick-to-itiveness, education, and continue to grow in this business, because it can definitely be rewarding. As far as our podcast was concerned, I think this episode is going to be a lot of fun for a lot of people, because it gives a different perspective on operations. So we tried to go in and paint the picture of what's going on within student housing, how it's applying to particular parts of the industry, and then we took some takeaways from how's Cardinal doing it, are there differentiating factors, and how can those same types of lessons be applied to anyone's particular business as they're out there running a property or running an organization or a region within student housing.
Yeah, and it's really cool getting that perspective of, you know, Eddie was very much involved very early on with Cardinal, and they've just exploded with some massive growth.
Definitely.
I think even from the time that this interview was recorded back in September till now, they've taken over a couple of big portfolios and have continued to grow. And it's amazing kind of getting his perspective. I mean, he even says, hey, the team that we were, or the size that we were in 2013, could never compete with, you know, the big players that are in student housing today in 2019, because there weren't the resources and those type of things. So it's amazing to see. And I've got another podcast. I haven't even told you about this, Ken, but I've got another podcast that I'm working on where we're actually talking to a lot of the C-suite guys from management companies and ownership groups that are under 10,000 beds. So these are not, top 25 management companies, and getting a lot of their take. So it's going to be interesting, when that comes out later, to kind of, put this beside of, what we learned from Eddie and Cardinal in this, to, kind of see how is it that, a group that's under 10,000 is looking at growing, through acquiring or third-party management or whatever, and be able to see, what kind of challenges they see right now. So
certainly, I mean, when you're in those the smaller realm, initially, you're as I did when I was on the operations side, looking at just your budget and looking at your P&L and understanding your income versus expenses type thing. When you haven't reached that level of critical mass, it's very difficult to have some of the other programs that you'd like to have in-house as you're growing. But as you kind of catch your stride, so to speak, a lot of that starts taking care of itself just through volume. And it doesn't mean that you have to be large in order to be successful. Certainly, I'm not stating that, but it certainly makes some things a little bit easier, especially on the third party side when you're dealing with multiple owners and entity relationships and so forth.
It is one of, we'll tell you, and I expressed this on LinkedIn sometime in the past couple of weeks, that, walking away from a lot of the conferences and things that we were doing and that I was a part of in September and October, early October, I am a little, I don't want to say concerned. That's not the right word at all, but I am, and Eddie mentions this in the podcast as well. All of these management companies are running with pretty slim profit margins. I mean, it's kind of just one of those, necessary evils, right? And as far as management is concerned, and because of that, there's just very little that can actually be made off of management fees. And I'm a little concerned for the smaller guys, the regional type players that may be trying to do something innovative and come into the market and grow to a national level. I think it's going to be pretty hard for them to do.
Yeah, I think one of the phrases I coined in the operations world of third-party fee is the free or less program. So what I mean by that is that owners are happy for you to manage for them for free, or even if you would like to pay them to manage your assets. Sometimes it seems so. All operators, whether large or small, on the third-party side and even on the ownership side, have to have creative ways to continually reinvent themselves as they are going through these growth cycles and emphasizing the things they do well. And then with that emphasis, fulfilling that, because in truth, in third-party fee, you're only as good as your last financial statement. And most people kind of look at that and laugh, but it's totally true. So we really have in operations a struggle of making sure that we're performing not only just at turn, or not only just, in the lease-up mode of a new property, but every single solitary day. Operate as though the owner is going to show up at your property, the owner is going to show up at your corporate office, et cetera, and work to build that performance level up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, let's don't hold the audience back any further. Let's go ahead and push play on this interview, and we'll come back with a couple of takeaways.
Great. I think that folks will enjoy this, and looking forward to their feedback. Well, Eddie, welcome to the podcast today. I want to just kind of jump right in and ask you a few questions about Cardinal Group and what you guys are doing. And then more importantly, let's narrow in or focus on what's going on site, what's happening back in the corporate office, and maybe there's some lessons learned out there you can provide to us as we go forward. So sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. Let's kick it off.
All right. So tell me a little bit about yourself, what you're doing at Cardinal, and then, how's Cardinal look today? And tell us a little bit about your growth strategy.
Sure. So I serve as the Executive Vice President of Operations and oversee the operating arm of the company. Work a lot with new and existing clients as we transition and manage their portfolios ongoing, and focus a lot on the growth of the company, how and why we do what we do, and how we can continue to scale as we grow throughout the years. Cardinal Group is based in Denver, Colorado. We have a portfolio of 42,000 student beds, and we operate right now between 5,000 and 6,000 conventional units. We have an owned asset portfolio that makes up about 15% of our total bed count. And right now we're in about 33 states. We just transitioned into a new state, Utah. So that's a new one under our belt. But we've enjoyed a lot of growth over the last several years and are looking forward to continuing that in the years to come.
And then how are you stratified as far as owned versus managed? Are you mainly third-party fee? Are you a mixture? How does that work?
Sure. So, I mentioned just briefly earlier, a second ago, that we have about 15% of our student portfolio is owned assets. So we have several communities that were purchased under a fund vehicle that our investment shop had raised and finished placing last year. The rest of our portfolio is a traditional third-party portfolio. So we operate communities for large institutional shops, some REITs, all the way to single family offices that own real estate. So we kind of run the gamut of client profiles and client sizes.
Okay, good. It's good to know. So as you're going through your sort of your budgeting plan or your expansion plan, where do you see yourself the next, say, 24 to 36 months as a company?
We've been on quite an upswing. Just this year alone, through the end of June, we grew our portfolio about 25%. We're trying to grow in a controlled fashion. We want to make sure that our product isn't diluted along the way, that we're able to scale and invest in our personnel and our platforms to ensure that we're delivering for our clients. But we see continued expansion. We see continued expansion on the owned asset side via fund vehicles, both on in the student space as well as the multifamily side of our business. And then we see continued growth on the third party side. While we were getting to critical mass, call it 15, 20,000, 30,000 beds, the profile of our clients varied greatly. I think as we've continued to grow, one thing that we've done and will continue to focus on as we look into the future is expanding with existing clients, doing some consolidation with existing clients to operate larger portfolios for those folks. And we've started some of that work already and are confident that as we continue into 2020 and 2021, that we'll be able to realize some of those opportunities.
All right. And with obviously with a focus on the operations side and running student housing, which we know is, it's interesting, you've got a mix of both student and conventional. So do you actually run the operations with student differently than you do conventional, or does it kind of mix over together, or do you have one that overshadows another?
That's a good question. We're asked it often. I actually love giving the answer to it. I think we borrow a little bit from each. The conventional multifamily space is 45, 50 million units nationwide. There's companies that have been operating in this space for 40, 50 years, some longer. And by and large, that space is very sophisticated, the way that they utilize analytics and revenue management. Some of these things that are more typical in the conventional world, we're able to pull into our student operating realm and apply them. The way that we staff our student communities looks more like a conventional community as opposed to a staff that has 2 or 3 full-time team members and a bunch of community assistants. We actually look more like a conventional team when it comes to our on-site staffing structures. But there's a lot from student housing that we actually bring over into our conventional lease-ups and some of our conventional communities. Specifically on the marketing side, I think student housing has done a really good job at understanding lead attribution, has done a really good job at understanding brand development and executing that brand strategy within a particular submarket. And we've taken a lot of that pizzazz and a lot of that, very methodical work in brand development and deployed it on the conventional side to a lot of great success. Right now we're working on 4 lease-ups here in the Denver area, and each of them is in a different part of the city, and a couple of them are located in the downtown central business district. And the profile of that demographic looks very similar to a student in many ways. And so we've taken some of those lessons learned on student lease-ups and brand development into those assets specifically, and feel like we've gotten a lot of bang for our buck there.
That's good, because I know that back when I was running operations myself, I always made an attempt to run the conventional side almost like I had run the student side, just to the sense of urgency and getting people to get into that whole rhythm of an operational performance status, knowing that you've got to constantly empty and turn and go. I know that the turn is not as much on the conventional side, but the effort involved in getting the performance up there's lots of similarities there. So thanks for sharing that with us. So as you kind of look at some of your differentiating factors I know you've got obviously the student housing competitor landscape has grown over the years. What do you see as some of the factors that maybe set you apart from others, or there's some blends that happen, and kind of talk a little bit about how that transcends down to the site level?
Well, as a company, I think we were fortunate enough to expand into the third-party space at a time that, this is back in 2013, there were a lot of well-established companies, and we were able to not see their mistakes and not repeat them, but effectively there was some models out there, right? And we were able to look at some of the models, staffing models, resource models that other competitors had employed, and think for ourselves, before we really build this company, to a size and scale that we think we can, how can we really shake up the way that we're providing resources to our teams and our clients, most importantly, both of those two groups, in a way that is different and solves a problem. And one thing that we hear over and over from asset managers, and you hear this at conferences a lot, is that the drop off between the level of sophistication between a typical regional manager and their asset manager on the other side of the phone, that gap is pretty wide. And it's not because there's a lack of talent on the operations and management side. It's because there's a lack of time. And oftentimes a typical regional is asked to be, a jack of all. And when they're a jack of all, they're a master of none. And so we wanted to approach the resource model differently, and at a time that we hadn't built out all of the various departments that companies typically do. And so at that time, we had decided to push a lot of the resources via payroll dollars into the middle of our company and to build what we call operating groups and operating cells. And so an operating cell is our answer to a regional model whereby we deploy a team of 4 dedicated individuals that are assigned to a portfolio of communities and clients. And they have different disciplines, from accounting to leasing and marketing to general operations, and then, portfolio management and client oversight. And that allows us to make sure that we put our portfolio managers, the folks that are interacting with our clients, in the best position to engage with our clients, to make good decisions, to make them in a timely manner, in a way that's accretive to their overall business strategy. And that required us operating with a relatively lean executive team as we grew, but it proved that having more dedicated resources in our operators' hands, it proved that was a way that we can build a foundation of team members and a foundation of loyal and trusted clients that know that we're focused on the performance of their assets. And I think that's something that's really, made us stand out over the years. At the risk of sounding cliche, I think one of the things that makes us stand out is our culture. I think every company says the same thing, and not to knock any other company's culture, but speaking for our own, I think that we have a mutual agreement of striving towards excellence, and we have a very competitive culture, but it's not a step on your neck culture. It's competitive in the way that you see the folks around you doing great things, working hard, being creative, dedicating, themselves to the task at hand. And you want to do the same thing. And so, I think over the years, we've relied on that culture. It's the glue that binds. And, all companies have rock stars, but you can't build a company on 1 or 2 or 3 individuals' backs. It's just not sustainable. And so the culture survives any one person or any group of people. And that's something that we feel continues to drive our company and is something that, we'll continue to lean on as we continue to grow and hopefully attract talent to the company.
Yeah, and I think that having that corporate buy-in too from the very top is very important. I've worked with many companies where there was a sort of, I don't know if you want to call it lip service. That's probably the way to put it, where, yes, we're going to be this way, but then the executives don't act the same way, and it doesn't take long before everybody else picks up on that. So it's good to have companies out there that have the full buy-in from top all the way through, and then you actually can get things done. You can instigate an environment where everybody is successful and feels like they're contributing toward the overall goals and objectives of the company. So good point there for sure.
Oftentimes when I'm conducting an interview with somebody and we're hopefully fortunate enough to have them join the company, we always ask, do you have questions of us? And inevitably, call it 7 out of 10 times, someone will ask, is that real? Is your culture real? And, one of the things that we always talk about is the best idea wins. And from the first day I joined Cardinal to today, I can, give countless examples of discussions that we've had where the principals of the companies, our C-suite executives, are taking not a backseat in the conversation, but are letting other folks actually state their opinion. And at the end of the day, going with that idea. And there's so much to be said about a leadership team that takes the ego out of that to say, I don't have to be the one that came up with the best idea. In fact, it's even better that somebody else did, because we can solicit more buy-in and everybody can get in the boat and row. And I think that's something that I'm really proud of and of our company and being part of that. And I think that allows people to lean in when you're asking a lot of them, because they trust that you're not just, commanding from the top, but rather, leading from within the troops.
Yeah. Well, you talked a little earlier too about how your sites are structured a bit differently, and this may help some of our audience as well, especially when we start getting into the turn process and other things that happen, in the trenches, so to speak, where the magic occurs. But focus a little bit on the resource allocation of your site teams. How are that? You mentioned earlier there's some differentiating factors there. So let's get more specific about what those things might be and how that's benefiting the overall process of operations.
Yeah, I'd say that from a very high level, we take the sales process very seriously. And oftentimes, even at our most, value-driven communities, that contract is worth over $5,000, the annual lease contract that they're signing. And in many cases, some of our leases are worth $25,000, $30,000. And I think early on in the student housing space, there was this perception that you want to buy from somebody that you're comfortable with, that when you're leasing an apartment, yes, you want to be able to see yourselves there. But I think we may have gone a little too far in, folks walking out from around the desk with a wrinkled community t-shirt on and flip-flops. And that kind of casual laissez-faire approach, I think, ended up costing a lot of owners money via, rate reduction, loss of effective rate, or, additional spend on the gift card and intangible incentive side. And in fact, we still see that. And so our approach is to put professionals in the position on the leasing side, full-time professionals, to be able to convert those leases that we spend a lot of money generating. And by and large, we operate our communities with fewer community assistants, not that they're not valuable and needed, but we want to make sure that the folks that are catching the ball when it's kicked to them are very professional, take the process very seriously, and are there to actually convert that lease. I think sometimes when I say that, people, feel like that's a knock on community assistants, and it's not. They shouldn't be at fault for the fact that they're working a job while they're getting their education. That's a very admirable thing. We just want to put the right expectations on the right individuals. And so our community staffing structure may look like 2 or 3 full-time leasing agents with 2 or 3 community assistants, as opposed to 8 or 9 community assistants run by a leasing manager. Obviously, the numbers have to work out, and we try to compel our clients to understand the value proposition of having those full-time team members. But generally speaking, that's one of the main differences in how we approach the sales process of our staffing model.
Okay, good. I think that, having a dedicated group of people that are focused on that leasing effort, especially when you are leasing to 2 individuals at a time. You've got the parent and the student involved in each of these transactions. So it's very important to have someone who understands both sides of that equation and can speak to the financial side as well as to the more amenity, the lifestyle, the resident life things, the activities, other things that go on. It requires a bit more educated level, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but someone's got to be on point and understanding how that process works day in and day out. So interesting approach you've gotten there.
Yeah, and the consistency of somebody coming in and starting and ending an 8-hour shift and getting in their groove, starting and completing tasks, converting leases, doing follow-up is of great value, right? Oftentimes our community assistants will meet their hours by coming in 3 hours here, 2 hours there, a couple different split shifts during the day. And it takes time to get your head in the right place to be effective and productive at whatever you're doing. I find that myself. And so having those folks that are there dedicated to that, time slot as a full-time professional, I think we just get a lot of value out of that.
Well, it kind of leads me into a thing that I've read recently about what you guys do. So you've got these folks working on site. You've also got your corporate folks, your regional folks who are traveling. You're geographically dispersed like most student housing operators are. But you've got a policy that allows email quiet time. So could you give us a little bit of insight on that, how that came about, and then how it works? And then I'm sure there's got to be some exceptions to the rules, so to speak, with the way that operations runs pretty much 24/7 in the nonstop entertainment world.
Oh, fire, flood, or blood, right?
Exactly.
No, you're right. There are exceptions. So I believe what you're referring to is our 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. email blackout.
Yes.
So we've had some of our colleagues and good friends email us, when we posted that initially on LinkedIn, and a lot of question marks, like, is this real? I would say, as a huge advocate and a beneficiary of this policy, it is very real. Like most growing companies, when we were a smaller company, you've got a lot of folks that are working hard to build the company, right? And that requires long hours. That requires personal sacrifice. And at the end of the day, the end goal is always the same, which is we're trying to work to provide, to build a company, to provide stability for our families, to realize our professional successes so that then we can, on the other side of the coin, live fulfilled and balanced lives outside of the office. And there was a certain point that we realized, hey, we're there, not that we can slow down and kind of, put our hands up, but rather we're at the point that we have the size of team of resources that if we are working 16 and 18-hour days, we're doing something wrong. And so what
it gets to that point, right, where you just are you're either going to be burned out or you've just completed a very massive project. It's going to be one or the other. You cannot continue on at that pace for very long.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so we made a commitment that if we are going to make that work-life balance, just a pivotal initiative really for us to realize that at all levels of the company, from the top down, we really need to be committed to that. And so, Alex O'Brien, myself, a couple of others, really made that commitment. And I'll tell you from a very, from my seat, it really changed everything. Alex and I, tend to interact a lot during the business day, but a lot of that is meetings. And sometimes there's, banter in the evenings to kind of move conversations along. And at the end of the day, we realized, those same conversations can be in our inbox whenever we come into the office. And are we being that much more productive, or are we in fact instigating stress in each other's lives, not just Alex and I, but everybody's, by sending these emails? And, as I talk to some of my colleagues in the space, there's almost this competitive nature of, are you working? Are you self-sacrificing for the company? Are you emailing at 10 o'clock? And to us, we wanted to cut that out. We wanted to make sure that our client correspondence was by and large between business hours. And that if somebody chose to work after hours, it was at their discretion without anybody putting anything else on their plate. And I would say that, the things that we've implemented in the last couple of years, that one right there, I think has given a lot of people a lot of peace of mind and has done a lot to trend us to where we want to be on the work-life balance, to where people feel like they're not beholden to the company 24 hours, but rather, they give us their time when they need to, and then they can focus on their families or themselves or whatever they want to pursue outside of the office and not feel guilty about it.
Good. It sounds like an interesting plan. I'm obviously curious. I'm sure our listeners will be as well, as to the returns on that and how well that works out over time. Because equally, we've all tried different methods in that area, and some work, some don't. But I think overall, if you do have a policy that allows the family time and the work-life balance, that's going to get you farther down the road, and it probably has a good plug into with the overall strategy, culture, and strategic planning of a company. So let's move on into another area, which you just finished the most massive portion of any student operator's life, the dreaded, 4-letter word turn. So how did that go? Number one, and then secondly, as you've come through that, and you're probably, hopefully, over the hangover stage of turn, where your head's at this moment, and then what are you focusing on for the remainder of the year, and
Sure.
what operational strategies are you trying to do? Is this a time where you go through, and now that that's done, it's time to schedule more training for your site teams, or how does that? What's happening in that area? I know budgets are another big concern of you as well,
Yeah.
but talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. On the turn subject, you're right. Yeah, we're about 3/4, if not better than that, through with move-ins. We have some late late August and early September move-ins, but by and large, we're in the process of buttoning up turn. Whenever we get to this point, I know everybody's waiting for September 1st or whenever their last move-in is, but I always think of those videos that I watch on social media that are people that are about to win a race and then they slow up and somebody passes them. We always have to remind ourselves, hey, we may have had move-in, but we need to make sure that we're auditing all of our invoices, that we don't have any unexpected surprises that we then need to go back to our clients and say, hey, we had a successful move-in, we hit occupancy, we hit revenue numbers, but we're X, percentage or dollar amount over turn budget. And we didn't know that until the middle of September. And so we try to stay calm, cool, and collected, even though we're by and large past move-in, and make sure that we go back and button up everything and make sure that very risky exercise of executing a good turn and move-in is actually indeed successful. So our teams are doing that, a lot of auditing, a lot of systems checks, things of that nature. But we're also switching gears right now to our annual planning period for all of our calendar year budgets. We're in the middle of providing rate recommendations to clients, which we try to get out, at the end of August, beginning of September, to ensure that we can hit our renewals early and make sure that we're in a position to project out to market for markets that lease really early. And oftentimes we will ask for some approvals on opening rates, and then through the business plan and budget process, we'll kind of solidify the full spectrum of rates, but generally want to make sure that we're ahead of the game on approvals for initial renewals and new leasing throughout the portfolio. As part of our annual planning process, we do a lot of training. So every year it's inevitable that we'll, turn over the stones that are our budget tools and our business plan tools and all of those things, and refresh them and hopefully make them more user friendly and also impactful to our clients when we deliver them. But we also want to make sure that, as kind of a bottom up focused company, that we provide the training to our team members to teach them those skill sets, not just how to use the budget, but how to budget. Not how to fill out the annual business plan template, but really how to utilize it to tell the story of the asset, so that the asset management team and owner understands that we understand their investment strategy and at the site level can articulate that. So we're working on a lot of that. We'll work through that process through the middle of October. Some budgets are kind of due at the beginning of November, but that's a huge company-wide initiative on both the student and the conventional side of the house. And then we're also doing what we call roadmap projects. So we have a team internally that focuses on the project management of infrastructure development, whether we're going to roll out a new system, process, workflow, whatever it may be. There's a number of components that go into that. And so what we do as a company is we try to get ahead of not only the project management of that, but more importantly, the communication of that. So every quarter, the month before the quarter begins, we send out a roadmap to our communities to say, here are all the things that are going to change, whether it's process, forms, whatever it may be, so that they understand what's expected of them and what they need to make time for in the coming months. And then we go about deploying that. So we're working through the end of Q3, obviously. At the end of this month, we'll project out. So beginning of September, we'll project out the Q4 roadmap initiatives. And then we'll use that project management team and the operations folks and other folks from different departments to make sure that by the time we hit those deadlines for deployment, that we have everything that we need, training documents, templates, so on and so forth. So a lot of that kind of stuff after turn.
And so those are some of the established things that may have happened as you planned maybe the previous budget year. What happens in between? Do the site teams are they allowed to send in ideas or suggestions, or now that they're sitting out there in the trenches, so to speak? Are they, and they're seeing things that are happening, are they able to bubble up some of those things to a group and be able to have some of those things heard and maybe eventually put into the roadmap, or how does that work?
Oh, absolutely. We have a little button that's call it an idea box in our digital dashboard, which is a place all of our team members go to for a number of things. But it allows our team members to float ideas that come directly to the kind of executive team for things that we need to pursue. But by and large, our operators are actually the ones that develop that roadmap and then feed it up through, call it an executive committee that marries not only the operations initiatives, but all the other initiatives from different departments together to say, okay, what can our team handle? What can we conceivably absorb on site? But a lot of the ideas, quite honestly, that come through that committee are effectively from the site level up. One of the things that we're working on right now, as an example, is an automated lease workflow that utilizes some of the features that Entrada has available to it, and the timeliness of that request and the kind of the initiation of that came from some of our folks who had been on site that are now at the home office and recently transitioned. But yeah, I mean, we're very open to incorporating ideas that come up from the site level or any level of the organization.
Okay, good. Well, let's shift to somewhat of a broader view of the student housing sector. So, coming from the vendor side, I've been on both sides, actually, vendor and operations. I always run across this when I was on the operations side talking to vendors, and now on the vendor side talking to operators. This discussion about, is it third-party fee? Is it owned versus not? Is it portfolio size? What's the age of the property? Is it, I'm working in the public or private sector? Is this affordable housing, conventional housing? I hear all those terms. And of course, we're focused here on student housing, but there are definitely some operational differentiators from student living than maybe mainstream conventional housing. We talked a little bit about it before, about how you're running your properties, maybe borrowing some things from conventional, some things from student. But for those of us who are in the space, it's easy for us to go, yeah, we know that. Of course, we understand that. There may be others who may need a little bit more knowledge and understanding of what's happening. Maybe they're coming into the space just now. They might be one of those CAs we talked about, or they might be a rising star on the leasing side, or they might be coming in on the maintenance side. So what differentiates student living from mainstream conventional housing, in your opinion?
Yeah, you just hit on a couple of them. But, I think one of the things that we talk about often is the fact that student housing is effectively a lease up every year, whether you're doing a traditional lease up or you have a stabilized community. Obviously, you've got your renewals there, but you have a time certain that you're working towards. And so the pressure of a lease up effectively is there in student housing, whereas in the conventional side of our business, if you miss occupancy 1 month, you have an opportunity to catch up. And yes, there are things, you have adjustments for seasonality, i.e., if you go into the winter months, 10% behind on occupancy, traffic is going to slow down depending on your market during those months. At least traditionally it does in some of the northern markets, but multifamily is generally a little bit more forgiving in that sense. From a market volatility standpoint, I think that we've seen record deliveries on the conventional side at a national level each of the last, I think, 3 years, maybe 2017, 2019 are both records. But the ability for new deliveries to severely impact a market, like we've seen in some student markets, is a little bit more tempered on the conventional side, and I'd say, in fact, a lot more tempered. So that's one thing that's very, very different. The impact that new deliveries have on specific submarkets. And then the demographics, I think that I mentioned it earlier, where we're grabbing some things on the branding and brand development side from student and taking it over into conventional. But I think the fact that we have two different parties that are entering into a lease, both the guarantor and the student, and the sheer volume, which I think you had mentioned a second ago, those things are very different. A 250 unit conventional community would have 250 leases, where a 250 unit student community may have 700 leases. And that's a a very different proposition from a technology utilization and a personnel utilization standpoint. The sheer effort and energy that goes into signing 700 leases with two parties versus 250 leases under a joint and several lease that the actual leaseholder is qualifying themselves. And then on the facility side, I think you mentioned that at the very end, the wear and tear on the communities for the student properties is that much greater, and not the obvious, right? The partying and the rowdiness, broken exit signs, all of that, yes. But students, as compared to their conventional renter counterparts, do not have full-time jobs by and large. And so the amount of time that they're spending at the community using the mechanicals, the ACs, the number of people that are sharing a washer and dryer, all of those things end up requiring a student operator to be more keen on preventative maintenance and prudent capital utilization than you might be on the conventional side. So those are kind of a few high touch points there. Feel free if you want me to elaborate on any of them.
Oh, no, I think that you've touched on those. I'm sure a lot of people will say, yes, we have that and more. And of course, we're always welcome on the Student Housing Insight website, there's a place for people to be able to log in and actually add commentary and things like that. So I always encourage them to do that. And it always helps expand our space when they hear part of the podcast and go, there's so much more. They can still add things to that. We definitely could talk for days about some of this stuff, especially the mean time between failure and asset utilization and the heavy use, I guess is probably the best way to put it, of a student versus conventional housing, depending upon the areas that it's in. But you touched on a lot of that right there. So good bullet points all around. Well, as we kind of look at some of the challenges that student housing operators are facing, let's focus a couple of minutes on that and talk a little bit about maybe some of the market volatility you're seeing and maybe some of the other items in that category that may make you, I don't know if you're going to think twice about your next group, or what's happening in the space that's going to either allow us to continue to move forward or maybe have pause for concern. Is the economy a problem? And I don't want to get too far deep in the weeds on those, but just more of an overview.
Sure. Well, I would start with this. I think that it has been and will continue to be increasingly difficult for an operator to become competitive in the space if they do not have critical mass at the onset, meaning that Cardinal Group at our size in 2013, quite honestly, couldn't compete in 2019. We wouldn't have the resources, both in personnel and technology at a base level, to be able to provide the level of sophistication that is required of our clients. I think that we know the amount of investment that you have to make in those platforms, and we also all know that management companies aren't a high margin business, right? And so if you're not approaching it with a portfolio that's in your back pocket, or you're not approaching it with a vertically integrated strategy, that proposition will be very difficult. So I'd start with that. But for the operators that are in the space, I think that, market volatility I hit on a little while ago. I think talent acquisition and development and retention is something that we're really keen to and focused on as a challenge, both just as an operator in the space and the fact that the economy is such that the unemployment rates make especially on-site positions very competitive. We think that the leveraging of technology is a challenge just because of the fact that, one, the demands from owners and institutional groups on data, predictive data especially, is becoming greater and greater. But two, the sheer investment that you have to make in actually being able to aggregate that data and visualize it. We see that as a big challenge that operators in the space will be facing. And then, scaling. I think all of those things, both the talent pool, asset, talent acquisitions and leveraging available technology all speak to the ability to scale. I think that I'm sure many of my competitors would agree, or peers would agree, that maintaining potency of your service offerings and your performance as you scale is of utmost concern. And so making sure that you're investing in the right areas so that the quality of your product isn't dropping off as you grow is a huge challenge for everybody. And we hope to be facing that kind of head on. On the talent side, going back to that for a second, There's been such growth in the sector. I think I was reading an article the other day that 2017, 18, and 19, there were over 325,000 conventional units delivered nationally. We've seen, in the volume of, 40, 50,000 units per year on the beds on the student side being delivered. And with that growth, a lot of teams have had to develop their talent from within. And yes, we've grabbed from the hospitality space, and student has grabbed from conventional, but by and large, the gap in that talent pool as compared to the growth of the industry over the last 5 years remains pretty vast. And so we're very keen on ensuring that the learning paths that we put people on internally allow people to see a long-term future for themselves, not only in this industry, but specifically our company. We know that we need to make key hires from outside of the company as we continue to grow and develop certain disciplines. But we also know that we need to be able to leverage the talent that we have and continue to grow those people so that as we're faced with, issue of acquiring talent and maintaining talent and people in their seats, that we've got a fighting chance as compared to our competitors.
And kind of going back on the technology side for a second, and it kind of leads me to my next point is there's so many different ways we could go with technology, and there's a few things that have happened over the years in student. We went from, for example, you remember the old days where you had a security button by your bed,
yep.
And now we've gone to smartphone technology and things like that have changed over time, but now there's all this next thing, the next best thing, yep. The best thing. You pick a phrase to put it in, and we know when you're developing these assets that's a difficult challenge to try to get them into that cycle, especially when a development takes 2 to 3 years or sometimes longer to deliver on those. So you've got infrastructure issues and things like that to deal with. And without really going into the in-depth of the behind the scenes low voltage infrastructure and all that, what are students demanding that you have today? And then what technology pieces have you actually implemented to meet some of those challenges or those requests?
Sure. Well, I think what you may have been alluding to earlier is that what I call a shiny object syndrome. I think that
yes.
We're seeing the multifamily space in general. I was just at the National NAA conference here in Denver in June, and some of the displays and the exhibition floor just blew me away. But what I left there with was that there is no shortage of vendor options in the space to partner with, to do any myriad of things. And it's very difficult for companies to maintain the discipline that they need to understand what value proposition is that driving? Is it perceived? Is it actual? And what do you need? What does your company need? Because depending on your size, where you're at in your growth curve, a number of things, you really have to be disciplined at what you decide to leverage on the technology standpoint. And I think that there's oftentimes this pressure to jump into the deep end, and then you find yourself wondering, what did I actually get out of this besides, a lot of additional work? And so we try to be very disciplined with that. We hired Kara Athman as our VP of Data and IT, and she comes from the consulting world and has really done a phenomenal job at helping to craft what our technology roadmap looks like. And a lot of that has been focused on the BI side, on the business intelligence side, in aggregating all of the disparate data sources that we use, whether that's our HRIS system, our operating system, and aggregating all of that information in a way that we can normalize it and visualize it for our clients, our teams here at the home office and on site. And we see that ROI on that technology really being driven by time efficiency. We're about to deploy a new reporting suite for our clients that will cut out thousands of hours across the company on a weekly basis, and have a second phase of that will do the same coming this fall. And so we're really, really focused on the data side. The data aggregation and visualization side is a huge component of our technology platform moving forward. Speaking to the students specifically, really we're focused a lot on the experiential side. So, I'll give a shout out to Mitchell Smith at Scion. We were at ULI, and he and I forget who else were doing a presentation, but they had talked about how really we have to compare ourselves to the Amazons of the world, the Ubers of the world, right? It's about this transactional experience. And I thought that was a very good way to put it. And we, think about it in a very similar fashion, that the experience that the customer has, the ease of transaction, the intuitive nature of it is really important. And we've adjusted the way that our websites function, the design aesthetic of our brands, the way that our leasing workflow works, our utilization of some AI technology that handles tours, or setting up tours rather. We've adjusted all of those things to focus on that experiential nature that the student expects these days. And I think we'll start seeing more and more of that, especially as smart technology continues to be integrated into the units, as things like self-guided tours become more of a thing. And, again, we want to be on the leading edge of the utilization of that technology, but want to do so in a prudent way, that we're not overselling something and we're really truly getting the value out of it.
Yeah, especially when there's some of these items don't really have a full focus ROI on them. You're kind of betting on the come, so to speak. Yeah. You hope that some of these things will actually pay dividends in the long run, and not necessarily through an ancillary model, but more on the lines of retaining a student or even attracting them in the beginning to even come and rent at a student community. It's sometimes seems like a crapshoot. So it sounds like things are still happening in that same realm, where there are some absolute things. We all know that internet's the prime importance, and you got to have that before you have running water. But beyond that, some of the other things that are happening now with some of the smart home technology and other things that are coming along, or even dedicated study space and things like that, are becoming more mainstream in the wants of what students are looking for, that sense of social community to not only get their studies done, but also have a level of environment and ecosystem within their own units. I think those are things that are coming along that are touching upon that realm. There's a lot of that happens on the conventional side, but I think we can learn a lot from student because of the type of environment that we place those folks in. And then as they transition over to conventional, we can kind of see some of those patterns continue. But interesting focus on smart home, interesting focus on guided tours. I know that's another big thing that's happening. You walk into the unit and there's Alexa's sister that's going to greet you, for example. So, all right. So we'll leave the technology. We may even have another podcast on just technology at some point. I think there's a lot we could talk about there. But how are student expectations changing? So we've talked about obviously they respond to tech. They want the latest and greatest. Of course, they want it now. Yep. But what are those expectations that are happening that are maybe giving you some pause for, wow, we might need to change our operational focus, or here are some things that are happening now that we thought we'd planned on, but maybe we've got to change our strategy? Sure.
I think that going back to the experiential nature of the transactions that we have with them, whether they're conversations or quite literal transactions, I think that the authentic nature of those transactions is really important. And that plays into so many things. It plays into the way that we train our teams to interact and converse with our residents and our prospects. That goes for both our leasing team members as well as our facilities team members. But it also plays into how we market. I'll use video content as an example. We do a lot of, produced, kind of very clean, very storyboarded videos, and those serve their purpose and do very well on the analytical side and serve their purpose. But so do very organic, non-polished videos. And so we've been doing some A/B testing to show the efficacy of polished production style videos versus organic, hold your hand in the phone and kind of walk somebody through a unit type videos. And it's really compelling to see some of the analytics on the back end and hear some of our folks on the marketing side talk about how effective and how authentic those videos are perceived. So, I think authenticity of transaction, authenticity of interaction is really important. I'm sure we can talk about the physical space and what they expect in programming and bed bath parity and unit finishes and all of those things ad nauseum, but maybe I'll leave that for a development focused podcast and a focus there on the authenticity of how we interact and market to our residents.
As you kind of build the value proposition to a student, and they're coming in to the leasing office, how does that experience work? I mean, are they? I used to train my student operators to. I said, if you want to learn how customer service is, please go spend a couple of hours at Chick-fil-A just take a look at what they do. Take a few things away from that and come back and apply it at your location. If a prospective student is coming in for the first time, what does the experience look like?
Sure. Well, one thing that we do is certify all of our leasing team members. We have a proprietary program that's called Cardinal Way of Leasing that really trains our team members on engagement and how to seek out and get information that you need from the prospect to curate their experience. So we're very methodical about that. We have certification pins. We give awards and bonuses and things based on folks applying that program and really have seen a lot of success in that. But we also want people to put their own personal touch into it in a way that will allow them to build rapport with the individual. From a kind of in-person perspective, I'll go back to my comments about the professionalism and how we look at staffing our community is a little bit different from that lens. I think that if you talk to most operators in the space, they want their team members to stand up, greet somebody, come around the desk, engage them with eye contact, make sure that they're making somebody feel comfortable and at home before they engage in the business transaction. And we do a lot of that as well. I think that making sure that our team members are educated not only on their community, but their subset of competitors is really important. Going back to the magnitude of the buying decision that students are making when they decide where they want to lease, it's really important that our team members understand who and what we're competing against so that whenever we're talking about the value proposition that is our community, whether that's location or amenities or floor plan types or whatever it may be, that we're not just stating those value propositions as if, we're the only, game in town. We want to make sure that we're articulating those value propositions in comparison to other communities that they may be considering. And ensuring that we're highlighting those in a way that really speaks to what that individual is looking for. So I think those are some of the areas that we focus on when we're training our team members, and obviously doing all the right things, taking IDs and learning somebody's name and making sure to be conversational. I think all of those things are things that we focus on.
I was kind of touch upon another topic, trying to switch gears just a touch. When I was running student properties, one of the big things that would always come up is like, gee, Ken, if we were just closer to campus, we would have more traffic. Or if the bus route ran over here, I think that things would be better. We aren't always allowed to be the developer, are we? We can't, we always get to say, well, gee, it'd be great if I had that piece of land that's just right across the street and I've already got a walking bridge and it's all good to go. How do you handle those operational challenges when you've got a team that may not be in the, let's call it the most ideal situation, but you've been handed something by the owner that says, make this work?
Sure. I mean, I grew up, I'm one of 6 kids, and I grew up with a brother that was the brother that was immediately older than me, track superstar, went to Stanford as a decathlete. And I remember ho-humming about the lack of natural athletic ability that I had in comparison to him. And I remember my mom telling me, you can't be something that you're not. We've all heard that, right? That was a hard lesson to learn. But I think that we approach every asset with that kind of in mind. Oftentimes when we transition a new community, the website will say luxury student housing, and we're, a community that was built 15 years ago, and there are 3 campus adjacent, fall out of bed onto campus communities that have jacuzzis on the balcony, kind of thing. And so we try to own what we are, right? And we try to write the story of the community to fit our position in the market and really the value proposition to the demographic of renter that we're renting for. When you look at students on a spectrum of income, household incomes, as an example, there are a subset of those students that come from households that may be only able to afford $500 a month, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that you need to sell it as luxury. You can sell it as a great value, high level of customer service, on the shuttle route, great amenities, larger, bedrooms, whatever it may be. You have to find the story that you want to tell for that community. And that's what we challenge our teams to do. Is it's not going to do our clients any good, or ourselves any good, as, in service to our clients, to ho-hum about what we aren't and what we don't have. The sooner we get to understanding who we are and what we have to offer, the quicker we'll be able to come up with a plan that's actually beneficial to the investment strategy. So, we own it. Long story short, we try to own it and project that out to the market.
Cool. I think that's a good point for everybody. It's like, don't be something you can't be, but always strive for the very best you can be. So to me, those are the things. And of course, having a plan, as I've quoted Lewis Carroll many times, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So it's important to know what that roadmap is, and then be able to follow it within the confines of what that particular asset is and what it can deliver in the area that it's in. I'm going to change gears just a little bit too. We talked about turn before, so I'm gonna save that on and move to the lightning round as we're sort of wrapping up here. So first, we'll talk about the innovation pieces and some of the areas that we should be focusing on. But first and foremost is, what advice can you offer to site level personnel regarding establishing a best practices approach to on-site operations? And by that, I mean taking pieces and parts out of different areas, bringing them together for the best way to do things based upon some of the experiences that you've had. What advice can you offer those site folks at this point about, here's a cool way to run your operation? If I had a couple of different things, what would you focus on there?
I would focus on one thing that I think really benefited me as I was coming up. And I've been, I've sat in the leasing agent's chair, bookkeeper, assistant manager, community manager, and some of those a couple of times. But as a community manager, the thing that I think benefited me the most was being inclusive, being very open and honest and engaging about major tasks and workflows that were on my plate, whether it was planning my turn budget or strategy with my maintenance team lead, or sitting down with my leasing team member and having them own a first draft of the leasing and marketing section so that they can earmark things that they really feel are valuable to our marketing strategy in the year to come. Those things require you to be timely and diligent, meaning they take more time because you are involving more people. But by doing that, you train folks on skills that they didn't have before. You train them up to think of things the way that maybe you are, and train them up for that next role. But you solicit buy-in. And that's one of the most important things, is that people feel like they have ownership, or they had participation in developing a plan that they are then the recipient of. And so when I think of, some of our best managers, some of our best portfolio managers, directors, folks that have kind of come up through our system, those folks are the folks that were very giving of themselves, and they're a very open book, especially when it came to high level processes, so that they were soliciting team buy-in and training those underneath them, or on their team, to take progression in their own careers. I know that's not very I don't know that's very tactical, but a tactical answer, but that's something that I know definitely benefited me as a community manager.
Good. Well, now let's talk a little bit almost in conclusion, but what areas of operation should we be investing in, or focusing our attention on in the next 3 to 5 years? Maybe there's 5 or 6 items you could touch on quickly in that area.
Yeah. We've talked about, big data, I think is really important. I think the investment world and the asset management world will continue to require timely, visualizations of data that is more sophisticated than maybe we've been used to projecting. on a weekly or monthly basis. Automation, I think, is something that we're really focused on. We're really focused on buying back our time so that our teams are spending less time in report compilation and auditing and more time taking action based on what that data is telling us. I think in the student housing space, revenue management is going to be something that's key in the next 24 to 36 months. YieldStar, I think, is the incumbent there, but they have, over the last 3 to 4 years have lost some market share in the core operating system side, and Entrata on the inverse has consolidated market share and is in the process of releasing their own revenue management tool. So I think that the maturity of a lot of our, call it top 50 markets in the student housing space, the depth of market, the depth of historical data will allow operators to actually utilize revenue management in a way that we by and large have not been able to in student housing. And then smart technology, I think that's something that, especially since we continue to see a lot of development, both in the conventional and student housing spaces, the integration of smart tech in units, in common areas, in ways that allow us to do things like self-guided tours, will continue to be a driving force in this industry that we all need to be thinking about.
Very good. Well, here's a couple of personal questions to throw at you. So, should I ask what keeps you up at night, or should I ask who keeps you up at night?
Heartburn keeps me up at night, and my 3.5-year-old son. No, quite honestly, I think every year that passes, my work hours become more regular. My wife, I think, is very happy. And no, I think we're very happy about the company that we've built and about our prospects in the future. So not too much other than heartburn occasionally.
Yeah. Well, if we can leave with if you could touch on like one or two key topics for folks who are maybe not necessarily struggling with operations, but maybe having a few challenges here or there, or could improve their processes. I know we've touched on a lot of different areas throughout this podcast, but if there's one or two takeaways, what would you say that puts you on the spot a little bit and say, Eddie, if coming from the experience you've had, what's the best advice that you could give me as an on-site manager or assistant manager, leasing professional, maintenance supervisor, et cetera?
Yeah, I'd say good old-fashioned hard work. I think that the lessons that I've learned along the way have a lot to do with the fact that you can't get where you want to get by cutting corners, whether that's building a team, whether that's developing a budget, whether that's developing yourself. You have to be intellectually honest with where you're at and where your team's at and kind of how to approach that. And so I think that being introspective about the things that you need to work on as a manager in delegating and communicating and in your soft skills, interactions with your teams or your clients, those are all things that you have to be aware of if you're expecting to move to the next level, because inevitably you'll be managing a bigger team, whether that's up or down, and your ability to handle stress, come up with solutions to complex problems, and motivate a team to seek out a goal and achieve it will require that of you. And those things, I think, are some of the bits of advice I'd give folks that are looking to continue to develop themselves and continue to progress their careers.
Very good. Well, Eddie, I really appreciate you stopping by today and joining us. I know that there'll probably be lots of questions that folks may have, and hopefully they'll reach out through the blogs that we have on the Student Housing Insight side. And looking forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you.
I appreciate you having me, and I've enjoyed working with you on this. So thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
All right.
Well, there you have it, guys. Again, Eddie Moreno, EVP of Operations at Cardinal Management Group out in Denver, Colorado. Great guy, great company. Love their culture. Love everything that they're trying to do from a standpoint of delivering on what Student Housing Insight's mission is, which is make student housing better. They seem to constantly be looking at how they can do things better for the resident, do things better for the employees, do things better for the investor, and that's the right way to do it. You take care of your customers will take care of your employees will take care of your investors. So really appreciate him taking the time out to spend with you on this. And thank you for taking the time out to interview him as well.
Oh, glad to do it. I'm so happy to see our industry, especially in the student sector, continuing to evolve and grow. And thanks to the efforts of folks like yourself and others who are emphasizing the educational aspects of things, and then dovetailing in the operations piece and giving folks perspective of not just running things on site, but also what happens in the corporate office, I think is valuable education as we continue to evolve our industry.
Well, and speaking of education, we have got something coming up next week on November 7th at 1 p.m. Excuse me, that may be 1:30. I need to go back and check that. I'll have it in the podcast notes for everybody to check. Apologies, I didn't bring it into the studio with me, but we're sitting down with Dr. Phil Batazuski, who is also one of our other co-hosts, and we recently did an episode on mental health and resources on campus. We're actually following that up with a webinar that we're doing with Grace Hill. That's going to be on November 7th. It will be recorded, so even if you're not able to make the live recording of it on November 7th, I'm sure we'll have that posted so that you can take a look at it, but it's completely free. All you need to do is go to the link in the show notes and you'll be able to register for it there. And I think that's about it. We've got some other great podcasts that are coming up, a lot of stuff coming out of our summits that was recorded that we are releasing. So excited for everybody to be able to listen to those things.
Sounds very exciting. I know that one definitely sounds intriguing, and looking forward again, as I said earlier, we put these out for educational purposes and for the folks in our industry to take advantage of. And I just hope that we'll continue to be able to do so and continue to get feedback from everyone on future podcasts of things they'd like to learn more about.
Absolutely. And again, thank you to today's sponsor, Simple Bills, for sponsoring this episode. They have been really great to work with this past year as a sponsor. And again, they're the sponsor of this episode as well. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.